Okay, good. Well, welcome everybody to this OGA hosted webinar. I'm Phil Sumption from the Organic Growers Alliance, and it gives me great pleasure to be hosting this webinar tonight on green manures for no-till market gardens. I've been in the organic growing business for 30 plus years. I mean, I've stopped counting now. So, I'm really passionate about green manures and really glad that we can host this webinar and bring some really great people together and loads of experience in the room. I'm not just the panelists, but I know some of the people who are joining us tonight have got so a lot of experience in this area as well. So welcome to everybody that's joining us. If you would like to introduce yourselves in the chat and get to know who else is on the call and in the room, then that would be great. As we go through, if you've got questions that you'd like to ask the panelists, then please put them in the Q&A. We're going to run Jesse's going to start us off in a minute, and we'll run Jesse's talk. If there's any immediate points of clarification, burning points, then we might take those. But otherwise, we'll go to Jayne straight after, and then leave most of the questions and discussion to the end. And I know we've got about 200 people registered for this webinar, so could be quite hectic with the questions. So please be patient if your questions aren't answered. We'll try and deal with as many as we can on the night. So yeah, I'll just say a little bit about the webinar program before we start. Some of you have been on these before that will know that we host these every at the last Wednesday of every month, and have been doing that for quite a while, since I think this is number 18 since COVID started. And it's the partnership between the CSA Network UK, the Gaia Seed Sovereignty Programme, and the OGA, and it's all funded by Farming the Future. We really appreciate them helping to make these happen. And the webinar program focuses on practical teaching and farmer-to-farmer knowledge exchanges from farmers and growers from around the UK. So, I mean, primarily this is a UK-based webinar, but so we were all trying to bring it back to the UK context. But it's always great to have different perspectives from others from around the world, and especially Jesse tonight. And the series is designed to increase knowledge exchange and learning on both politics and practice of agroecology, seed sovereignty, and food sovereignty. And if you're interested and want to be involved in running a webinar, or have got a theme or practice you'd like to know more about, then please do let us know either in the chat or send us the email afterwards. And if you want to know more about the organisations, then I think Susie will put links into the chats if you want to find out more about the OGA or the Seed Sovereignty Programme or the CSA Network UK. Okay, well, thank you for that. I kept that brief as I can. So this tonight, the point of the webinar is to address how we can better incorporate green manures into organic no-dig or min-till vegetable systems, something which I think is, and I know there's a few people who are have been doing it really well, but it's been something that has been quite sort of quite difficult or there's been a perception that it's been difficult to have green manures in organic no-till. But there are ways and means, and we'll find out some of those tonight. I'll talk first. I'll introduce Jayne, who's coming second. Jayne Arnold is a very experienced grower from Oxton Organics, which is in the Vale of Evesham, which she started in 1986 with her partner Julian Eldridge, with one of the first organic box schemes in the UK. And they've had a bit of a renaissance in recent years when their son Jake has come back to the farm, and they've been one of the pioneers in the UK of sort of market garden scale no dig production. So there's loads of experience and knowledge there, which we'll draw on later. And really pleased to have Jessie. Jessie, who is author of the Living Soil Handbook, and which I came across last year. I think it's a brilliant book. And also listened to a couple of the sessions that Jessie had at the Oxford Real Farming Conference, which are also good to catch up on. And really pleased that he can join us tonight. He farms, he's one half of the farm team at Rough Draft Farmstead with his wife Hannah Crabtree in central Kentucky, and also hosts the No-Till Market Garden podcast and a video series on YouTube about no-till market gardening. So he has loads of experience, and which it will be great to share tonight. And I think we'll just pretty much go straight into because I think you're going to talk a little bit about your farm as well. So let's straight into you, Jessie, and welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Phil. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm a big fan of Jayne's, so it's very exciting to share this platform. I'm going to get my screen share going here. Let me know if we're good here. Oops. Get back to our starting spot. Are we good there, Phil? Can everybody see?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, just is that the start? Yeah. No, all looks good. Good
Great.
to go.
All right. So thank you, everyone for coming. This is so exciting. I've been doing a lot of work over the years on cover cropping, and we've done a particularly large amount this year, done some different trials. So I'm excited to talk about some of the things that have worked and haven't worked. I should probably just kind of fill you in a little bit on our scale and what we do. Let me see if I can minimize this. There we go. So our farm is located in central Kentucky. We are in agricultural zone 6B, and we grow certified organic mixed vegetables. So no spraying down our cover crops, obviously. It's not an option for us. Our beds, just for context, are technically 4 feet by 50 feet or 1.2 meters by 15.24 meters. And they're permanent. They stay where they stay put. We also, as you can see, we use living pathways. I'm not going to talk about this today. It's a whole other conversation. But because of our rainfall, we've implemented you can see them there in between the beds. We've implemented a lot of living pathways on our farm. This is all chamomile all down here in this cover crop here. But this is, that's part of our kind of approach of getting as much photosynthesis going at all times, and also just protecting our soil from our really heavy rainfalls. In terms of bed tops, we have about 1/2 acre in total production. So if you just counted the bed tops, not the pathways or anything, that's what's in production. And it's about 1 full acre requiring management with paths and open areas. And we get, we're in agricultural zone 6B, very heavy rain events, not unusual to get 8 centimeters in a few hours, usually around 139 centimeters per year, but we can get quite a bit more than that. Hot summers, we're considered semi-subtropical. We've been up to 37, degrees Celsius, over 100 degrees Fahrenheit twice this year. And already, and it's not even July yet, which is really intimidating. We have cold winters without a lot of snow cover, but with a decent amount of frost freeze cycle. That means that certain things like peas and daikon radishes, that sort of thing, will break down in our winters, but other things may not. We get down to maybe negative 15 degrees Celsius, but that's usually maybe once or twice. This past year was actually really cold, given how hot our summer has been so far. But in contrast to that, generally, we're around that 0 degrees Celsius kind of range. So nothing too intense in the winter. And that can actually lead to some different issues that we'll talk about. Because one of the big things with cover cropping is that your climate is going to play a big role in what you're capable of doing. And let me talk about a little bit where we use our cover crops, because we don't use them everywhere. So these plots right here are kind of where I'm assuming you can see my mouse. Where these like lettuces and all of this stuff, these are our intensive plots. So that is a rotation of like lettuce, carrots, fennel, beets, green onions, kind of anything in that 60 days to maturity or less range lives in these plots. So that just gets a constant rotation of those sorts of crops, with yellow squash and zucchini and a few other things. But then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plots that are what we call our slow rotation plots. And so it's things like garlic, you can see there. A lot of it at this point hadn't fully been planted, but this is this cover crop that's dead to the right is that is in tomatoes now, and some like late season tomatoes. We put those in a little bit later than the ones that go in the tunnel. And then there's things like sweet corn, there's sweet potatoes where this tarp is now, there's sweet potatoes, and this will be, the middle plot will be like brassicas and stuff. So these are a little bit of a slower rotation. And in that plot, we use a mixture of hay and cover crops to manage it. And so that's where you see a lot more of our cover cropping, although we will take out, this is only our second year on this property, but in general, we will take out a handful of beds, like the poorest performing beds, and put those in cover crop for the winter, to kind of get them get them back to life a little bit. So that's why you see here to the left, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 beds that were in cover cropping. Actually, it was like 10 because these 2 under the shade cloth as well. So, and that's what that was pointing to. So a little bit about the cover crops that we use. We do, kind of typical summer stuff. We use buckwheat to hold the place of, in between crops. If we have a good plan for it and we don't need a specific crop in that place, or if we don't have it ready to go in there, or whatever it may be, we'll use a little bit of buckwheat. It's about a 25-day crop. And it's very easy to kill, just takes a mowing. And so we'll use that, kind of in several different places. And anything that just takes a mowing is one of my favorite cover crops, because that can be killed and replanted within a matter of minutes. And the less time you can have between something photosynthesizing and your plant going in, the better. Summer mixes we use, we oftentimes, before things like garlic, we'll use like sun hemp and sorghum Sudan grass, various beans, a lot of different summer legumes, field peas, and those sorts of things. Squashes, I like adding squash where I can too, because I feel like it's a good ground cover. And corn, millet, sesbania. So those are good summer mixes. Those require a little bit, more. We often put those in the winter kill category too. So if we're trying to get a nice little mulch for over the winter, we'll do a summer cover crop kind of later and let that just die down in the winter. And it works okay. It doesn't give you a really, really great mulch generally, but it does add a little bit, and that can be something you can work with in the spring. And same with things like field peas. Oats, like I said, do not reliably kill here in winter kill here in Kentucky. I would imagine for a lot of you, it's probably the same. It's not one I highly recommend to rely on to kill itself or to die from the frost like peas do. But over here, this is what we're going to kind of focus on is, rye, vetch, Austrian winter pea, crimson clover, winter wheat, lacy phacelia, which is one that has to be planted in the late winter. If it goes through too harsh of a winter, it will die. Cilantro, spinach, and beet family, red clover and crimson clover oversowed into brassicas. This is the stuff that's going to survive your winter. So that's the stuff that I want to focus a little bit more energy on, because those are the more difficult ones to manage. Like the stuff that dies in the winter, or the stuff that can be mowed, those, in terms of management, you put them where you need them and then you get rid of them really quickly. The overwintered stuff is just more complicated. So real quick, I think that Jayne's going to touch on this a little bit more. So I'll just say that, just my 2 cents for establishing a good cover crop is that you want to sow it with a seeder. I prefer that over broadcasting. If you have to broadcast your cover crop, you need to lightly rake it and then press it into the soil. That seed to soil contact is critical in achieving a good cover crop stand. And really, I always, and many other people say this is not something I came up with, but always treat your cover crop like a cash crop. Good soil preparation, getting out the weeds, and sometimes foliar feeding. If you see spots that aren't doing that well, you really want it. The better your cover crop is doing, the better your cover crop does, the better the next crop will do. So if you see areas, and they're great signatures, you can look at a cover crop and say, oh, that area is not doing well. I'll bet that's not going to do well when I put a crop in there. I need to figure out what's going on. And more often than not, it's maybe poor drainage or it's compaction. But those are things that can be addressed, and your cover crop can kind of be your flag for those things. And it can tell you when something's going wrong or not doing as well when you're growing your cover crop. So that way you can get it prepped for your cash crops. So one of the things that's really important is just kind of understanding what milk stage is. This is the stage at which your grains, primarily rye, are easiest to terminate. And that doesn't mean that they can't be terminated earlier. And we're going to talk about premature termination in a minute. For rye in particular, if you wait all the way until it's what's called milk stage, which you can see here if this video is playing for you, this is sort of between milk stage and dough stage. And it's usually when you press a rye plant, when you press the seed head at first, when it's starting to mature, you'll see the flowers, and they have like little yellow flowers. And then after that, you'll feel the actual seed head, and it doesn't feel like much. It feels very light, and then it starts to fill up, and it starts to feel heavier and heavier. And when you can press out a little liquid, that's when you're good to go. So you get like a 2-week window. And then that's when you can kill it in a way that doesn't require a lot of extra stuff. Like it's at its most vulnerable. And so that's when we start doing the kills that don't necessarily require like a tarp or something extra to kill the cover crop. So I'll touch on that a little bit more in a second. But one of the important things, and as Phil was talking about, like incorporating these into the market garden is a little bit more complicated than doing them in a field, because we can't just roll out a big roller crimper when we have permanent beds. Permanent beds complicate things a bit when it comes to termination, because you have these edges, and you don't necessarily want to be running over a really well cultivated bed that's, you've worked a lot on, that, has decompacted it. You don't necessarily want to be running over that with a heavy piece of machinery. So it makes things a little bit more difficult. And this year is mostly rye with some winter wheat in it and some vetch. And we're going to see a little bit what we did this season with this patch. This is all winter. This was an experiment of a bunch of different stuff, and it didn't go that great. But the rye and the winter, so these are the ones that we're going to focus on here. And basically what we did with this patch was we took 2 beds and we crimped it down like this. You'll actually see a short little clip of this in a second. But we crimped it down, basically 2 people with a bar, and we stomped it down. And then we rolled over these with a implement on the BCS walk behind tractor. It was actually the flail mower, but we did not have the flail mower going. I do mow cover crops sometimes, and I will talk about that in a moment, but we just kind of wanted to see if we could press it down really quickly. And then this one, we ran it over with the rotary plow, which is a slightly heavier implement. And then my favorite method, we rolled over with the rotary plow with it, with the PTO engaged. So the way that a rotary plow works, we'll actually get to see that in a second too. So this is that crimping method. This is what basically we just have a piece of fence post actually, and we're kind of stomping it in the ground. And you can do this by yourself, but it really takes 2 people to do it efficiently. And honestly, it's still quite a workout. Like, Greg is our employee. He was the one helping me there. And it's a really intense job, especially in our heat. So it's not something I love doing. So I've been trying to figure out ways that are faster and just, easier for my employees to manage. So we started doing the power harrow. And this is the power harrow that comes with the BCS, or not comes with the BCS, but you can buy it for the BCS. And I think it's 30. This one's 30 inches, even though we moved, which is not quite the width of our bed. I think that's 75 centimeters. So like I said, our beds are a little bit bigger than that at 4 feet, which I don't know how many of that is in centimeters, but the basically this doesn't cover the full bed, so we have to make 2 passes. But what it does is it basically is I have the power harrow up, so it's not touching the soil. It's actually pretty far raised up, and all it's doing is just clobbering the cover crop. And the effect here is that it kind of clobbers it and pinches the stem and kind of scatters it all at the same time. And it puts it down really nicely against the ground, which is key here if you really want to kill a cover crop. Now, this trial, we did this with a tarp included. So we did all these crimpings and then we covered it with a tarp. That one's a little out of order, but we'll come back to it in a second. But we basically, this is another one that, sorry, I'm not meaning to jump around. I promise to bring all this back together, but this is another thing we did, which is we just covered it. We covered one bed also with a little bit of compost. So we had this is the crimped bed. These are the beds that I did with the power harrow, with the PTO engaged. And then the next bed is one we just dumped a little fresh compost on, just to see which of these killed the cover crop the best, which of these is going to keep it down the best. That was kind of the trials, just to see what was the most efficient, what was going to keep the cover crop down the best, what was going to kill it the best. And then we covered it for 2 weeks with black plastic tarp. This was actually not a very long time generally, because we just had 100-degree weather really, really early on. And this was like late May and early June. So that was like kind of, we just, sometimes that's how it goes, that the weather works with you a little bit. And so when we removed it, you can see that most of the ways that we crimped it kind of all had the same effect, where it's kind of risen up. It's not super flat against the ground. It's kind of not great for planting, but now you can already see where those ones that we did with the power harrow, with the tines engaged, how much flatter that is in comparison to the other ones. One note on the compost one, didn't work very well at all. The thing that happened is that it actually protected the cover crop below, and the rye came back through pretty vigorously, which was surprising. It was actually quite the opposite of what I thought would happen, which I thought this would be nice and moist. It would be very, microbially just consuming that cover crop, and it did kind of the opposite. The rye really loved it. So anyway, we actually went back through after seeing this and went back over with the rotary plow and the power harrow, with the tines engaged, just to knock it all down so it was more uniform. And just a note on plastic. Let me see if I can. I'm also want to note here, when you watch this video, you can kind of see that the rye kind of pops back up a little bit. That's partially because it wasn't as tall and mature, and it was also a little bit of winter wheat. But it's also just not as effective of a crimping as this for us. Now, I also want to say this is not a tool made for this, right? This is made to stir the soil. It's made to harrow the soil. But it's a tool could be fashioned that could do more of this sort of clobber spreading, as opposed to, trying to necessarily crimp it. Like, the more I think about the crimper, the less I think that's the ideal tool if you have a PTO of some sort to utilize. And then this is the ultimate effect is, you get this nice little cover crop, and then we put our late tomatoes in there. This is also something I want to mention: solarization instead of occultation. And in our 2 small trials that we've done with solarization like this, the weed germination after we removed it was actually greater than with the tarps, because you can't leave the solarization, you can't leave clear plastic on your ground as long as you can leave a tarp. The tarp keeps it at like that 85-degree mark, even when it's super, super hot. The clear plastic jumps it up to like in the 100, 110, 120. And what I think is happening is you're germinating weeds a little bit lower in the soil. So when you pull that off, you actually get a little flush of weeds that you wouldn't normally get. At least that's my, hypothesis. I'm not certain that it couldn't be used in a really, well cultivated field, that you couldn't use, your high tunnel plastic, after you're done using it, like off this cat tunnel. That's not what this is, but that almost looks like that. So after you get 4 or 6 years out of your tunnel plastic, maybe you could have a second life doing some solarization. But studies show that after about 10 to 14 days, you start to see negative effects on your soil biology. So you really don't want to leave it on there for as long as I think it would need to be on a cover crop to really effectively kill it. And it wasn't, not all the cover crop was fully killed, which was a little bit challenging. So in our climate, this is, I think, really important. Cover crop alone is rarely enough. This is partially because our soil decomposes stuff really quickly. We're hot, we're humid, we're frost free for a really long period, from basically May 1st to October 10th. So a pretty good period of time that we're frost free, and we get very hot summers and a lot of rain. So a lot of decomposition here. And so that is part of the challenge. And also for most cover crops, it requires something else to kill it, like something beyond the crimping, just the way that it is in our climate. Not always, and I'm going to talk about those, but generally, like, I just assume I'm going to need something else to kill it, and I'm going to need some extra mulch to help with weed control. So in this case, we go over this with hay. And hay works for us, but it's not something I highly recommend because of the weed seed, but it's something I have access to. I don't have access to straw here. I would use straw if I had access to it. But we are not a grain growing region, so it's very expensive here. So in this case, like you can see, this was a few years ago. We did tomatoes, and the cover crop is good and it's there. You can kind of see it. I had actually mowed this cover crop, which when you mow something, it's going to break down faster than when you just crimp it. Because there's more surface area for microbes to consume. And so anyway, we went back and we mulched over top just to retain moisture. And I do want to talk about terminating cover crops before they're ready real quick, i.e. before the milk stage. And, generally it requires a mowing or crimping if it's tall enough, and then covering. Like it's not easy to kill a cover crop early without, that extra, definitely not without like that extra tool, without a solarization or an occultation or something, or a minor amount of tillage. And I'm actually going to talk about a little bit of surface disturbance that we did in order to get a plot ready. First, this was actually pretty mature, so it mostly died in the mowing process. And it was vetch and rye, and it mostly died in a flail mowing. Basically, we flail mow it, and then we wait one more week and we flail mow it again, right? So we're basically tempting that rye to come up into the heat, and then we mow it again. So what that does is it just kind of stops the rye pretty good in its tracks. Now, that doesn't mean you won't get some regrowth. It just does a really good job of kind of stopping it. And then and you can kind of see that there. But you can see there's almost no mulch. And then we come through and we actually rake off the mulch. And we do a super light surface tillage just to knock those roots of the rye and any weeds that have germinated. And then we just lightly rake that and plant it. And I'm talking maybe 2 inches. Maybe 1.5 inches. It's just enough. It's basically a raking, but we're trying to get it so that this is plantable. And, you can kind of see behind the wheel there, how that rye just sort of pops up, and we can just pull that out. And, ultimately this is what we get. And these are supposed to be chamomile pathways, but they got hit a little bit when we were raking that mulch into the pathways. We kind of killed them back a little bit too much, and walking back and forth, but now they're sort of rebounding a little bit. But this is the idea, is that the cover crop, died pretty easily. We mowed it. We did that light little bit of surface tillage, and then we replanted it really quickly. And now these beds that were really struggling last year from issues with drainage are just humming. And, this is a summer planting of lettuce, and in our temperatures, like I said, this is probably around when it was 37 degrees Celsius. So we got these lettuce all through that. And I think part of that I was just looking at it today, is that cover crop. I think that those things we're not really, we're talking more the technical side, but the biological side and what they add to the soil, they just create really healthy crops and really robust crops. And I was harvesting really nice romaines and stuff from these red romaines and stuff from this plot in the middle, in really, really intense heat, or I have been. So, and another one thing that I would say is we're also trialing, I didn't bring any pictures of this because we're just kind of playing around with it, is we actually grew some rye out to seed and we harvested the seed. You can actually see the rye out here that I'm talking about. We basically grew it all the way to seed, so it's totally brown. And then we harvested the rye by hand. I wish I had a better tool for that, but that's what we used. And then we mowed it down, kind of raked it all onto the bed, just made sure it was a nice little pile. And then we planted zucchini there. But the soil underneath was beautiful. So I'm hopeful that could be an option for some of our later tomatoes. Just grow the rye all the way. If we can find they make these like small handheld combines for people that test grains. So I'm thinking about maybe trying one of those, something to harvest that rye really quickly, just off the top, and then mow that down, have that nice mulch, and then plant things like late tomatoes. So still playing with that idea, but that could also potentially be an option down the line. So that's kind of the end of, in this case, mulch wasn't the goal. Like that's a lot of times, like a lot of people use the cover crop for the mulch. For us, the goal was the soil health and just to improve that drainage situation. And it seems to have done a really great job. If mulch is the goal, like I said, for us, we need something additional beyond the cover crop. It is rarely enough just to have the cover crop. It helps, but it's not for us the only thing that we can use. Yeah, and I write more about cover crops and cover crop termination and that sort of stuff in the Living Soil Handbook, which I know you all can get there from Chelsea Green directly or from your favorite booksellers. Yeah, I think that ends my part of the presentation. I hope I didn't go too far over. So I'm excited I think if you have any questions, unless they're super, super burning, maybe write them down and we'll try and get to them after Jayne talks, as Phil had said at the beginning.
Yeah, there's just one quick one which we can deal with, and I think I may have covered it anyway. This is from Chorvan. Did you crimp with the flail mower or power harrow, or tried both? I think you mentioned both.
I tried both. And crimping with the flail mower is not quite heavy enough. And the power harrow, I did try to just crimp with it, and it does okay. It doesn't do any better than the stomping. I just feel like if you can flip that PTO on, it's almost heavy enough. Honestly, it would be better for me to do that than using the stomp method. The stomp method is very effective, right? And people like Daniel Mays and others have used it for a very long time. For me, I don't like, it's a little too hot here for me to ask my employee to do that. That's how I feel about it. It's a little bit, it's just a very difficult thing to do. So, yeah, that's kind of, especially if you're doing, 10 or 15 beds that way, it's a lot of work. So yeah, that for me, finding that power harrow or, some option like that has been helpful.
Yeah, that's great. There's just a quick question on what soil type you have, and then I think we'll move on.
I've worked on a lot of different soil types now. Right now, our soil type that we're using is mostly, it's kind of a nice little, few inches of sandy loam, but it's mostly like a clay base. And it's a nice clay. It's not like an old worn out clay, but it's pretty heavy clay now. And so, yeah, some of these things would have to be altered for like sandier soils. Yep.
Okay, great. There's a question on slugs, which we'll deal with afterwards, because I'm sure that will come up in what Jayne talks about. So great. Thank you very much, Jesse. Yeah, Jayne, if you would like to share your screen.
Oh, wait a minute. I'm not sharing, am I? Wait a minute. One.
You right, Jane?
Yeah, there's the Zoom has got. Oh, wait a minute, there it is. Shrunk down there. No.
It's a green button, share screen. And if you,
I can't see Zoom anymore.
Oh, just put your cursor at the bottom of the screen, and it probably the toolbar will come up. If you just drag your mouse down to the bottom of your screen.
I think I've clicked you down. Let's have a look. Got you back. Right. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. Let's see.
Yep. You're going.
Yep. Okay. Right. We're Oxton Organics based in Worcestershire. I've been farming here since '86. We've got 12 acres of land, which I've farmed with Julian, who's practically semi-retired now, doesn't work on the market garden. Jake came and joined us a few years ago, and Jake's doing more wood stuff now. We're not really working on the market garden, but still here to help me out, which is more often than you'd like, I'm sure. Most of the time we've been here, we've been what I would say is conventional organic growers. It's always been organic. We used to grow for fertility. We grew a 2 to 3 year green manure, which we ploughed in as part of the rotation. We started doing no dig. The soil was always great after the green manure, but you could really see the detrimental effect of cultivating. So I started a trial in the tunnels about 6 years ago. And around that time, Jake came back and we did an outdoor trial. And then just really quickly the following year, went down to an acre worth of beds and all no dig and intensive using compost. We've transitioned over the last 3 years to growing cover crops. We had some issues with the compost. We were only using municipal compost, which wasn't very good, and we didn't particularly like it. Really hydrophobic and lots of plastic in it. So started delving much more into soil health and all the wonderful things that came with COVID. One of them was being able to attend soil health seminars and conferences in America and listen to people like Christine Jones talk about quorum sensing and how diversity affects your soil, and got completely inspired about trying to get diversity into the farm and growing cover crops. And it's been quite an interesting journey. The management, Jesse's covered it great, some of the management of the cover crops. I've been trialing quite a bit, growing a diverse mix in with our crops, not just the winter cover crop. It's quite easy to get it wrong. I mean, I've tried. You listen to the scientists and you think, yeah, I can do that. That's going to work. And sometimes lose my common sense. And I would certainly say, don't try and sow things before you've got the weed hold out. If the ground was really clean, I think I'd really be interested in trying to sow sooner. But the picture on the right is our squash this year with what should be a cover crop underneath it, but all that has to be hold out because it was just 90% weed. But it's sown now into a clean bed and it's all growing beautiful at the minute. We've had some lovely, the first time I did it, which was great to have such a good success because it inspired me to try more and more. This bed of leeks was the first diverse mix I put in. It's hard with short crops because you want all the cover crops you can buy are far too tall. They've been grown for biomass mostly. so I came across mole seeds, do some throw and grow flour mixes, and one of them is called a little carpet mix. So I sowed that a bit thick in these leeks, to be honest, with some trefoil, and it grew really thick. And I was always told you can't grow anything with leeks. You got to keep them weed free. They like to grow on their own. Well, these leeks grew in that really thick cover crop, fantastic, as Jake is proudly showing there. And so we've carried on and to try more mixes. When establishment, I think Jessie covered it quite well. I do quite a lot of broadcasting because of diversity of the mix. But I am wasting a lot of seed, and I think I'm going to try a more grading the seed into 2 different sizes, and then going over, drilling them with a jang in, like going over twice with 2 mixes. But if anybody's got any results with other seeders where you can put in a more diverse mix, I would be really interested in trying that. To get the cover crop established, keeping it watered is really important. And what I found with some crops, I found it really difficult to get the cover crop established. Our tunnel beds are 75 centimeters, and the tomatoes are planted a single row in the middle of the bed, and on the shoulders of the bed there's another cash crop. And when the cash crop comes out, I've tried sowing a mix. The first year I completely failed. Second year we were really determined to get something. I really didn't want dry, cracking soil. So we sowed some backups in modules, and gapped up twice, and did end up with a really nice mix. We've tried lots. I tried drilling, but I think I'd do that again. The herbs, I really like that mix, but not many of them germinated. So I think in future, if I was doing a mixed herb bed underneath the tomatoes, I'd definitely do them in modules first. But the low grow mix, which we now save seed from that low grow mix, it's a bit expensive to use as a cover, but it makes me very happy. So, it's not all about the money. But this mix has got, all sorts of little decorative convolvulus, candy tuff. We added ageratum, nigella. I like nigella. It's really easy to collect the seed. We've tended to end up with plants that is easy to collect the seed from. And ideally, I probably don't need all this flowering. I worry that, maybe I've got too much flowering in the beds. But it's amazing how well these tomatoes are growing. This cover crop on the right is this year in the glass house. It was bad communication, and it was sown quite thick, much thicker than I would normally. But everything's growing great. It's so green. The tomatoes are doing well. I'm going to go in and if I have to, I'll cut it down, but I'm going to go and try and trample it down this week, just to knock it back a bit, but to keep a green mulch on the ground and to keep it growing as well. There's lots of benefits. So Jessie's mentioned the soil. Our under the compost system, our soil, when we did some dug into the soil, but it wasn't improving as I would like, and it was quite hard. We've got very hard soil, so it was, planting was getting hard. It wasn't getting easier. But after 2-3 years of growing the cover crops, the soil is improving, and planting is definitely getting easier. One big benefit in the tomatoes has been that the fruit's not splitting. Even though, last year I forgot and left the irrigation on twice overnight, and I would have expected to go in and have loads of splits the next day, the next week, but hardly any at all. One of the advantages to this, besides the obvious one, is that in the autumn we've been just hoeing out the cover crop or mowing it down, leaving some flowers for the insects and stuff, and transplanting our winter salads into it. So I've been able to leave the tomatoes in for a couple of weeks extra, 2-3 weeks extra. I've tried this in the past, but because you can't water, because the fruit will split or get tasteless, it's never really worked. But the last couple of years, we've managed to get planted underneath before the tomatoes come out, which was nice. Fiddly, but of benefit. Cucumbers, I think cucumbers love growing with other plants. We've had some really good results with the cucumbers. I'm happy to go in and trim. We've got a strimmer with a blade on, so you can see where the edge of the blade is, and you're not cutting the stems of your crop. At first, I just did a trefoil and linseed mix or flax, and that grew well. So I chucked a couple of other plants in as well, some of the low grow mix, I think. The cucumbers, they were really reliable every week. We didn't get the highs and the lows, through the cucumber stage. I had one plant with red spider mite last year, which is the first time in donkey's years, and the crop was long. Sometimes the crops might seem a little bit slow at first, but they cropped right up until they cropped well right up until we took them out. I don't know when that was, end of September, which was great. Yeah, so we had a really good crop of cucumbers, and they're looking good again this year. And the soil in the tunnels, the reason I'm doing the mixed, they're really trying to get a really diverse mix in the summer in the tunnels, is because in the winter it's all salads and it's very hard to get anything else in. So I just really felt that my time to improve the soil in the tunnel houses is in the summer, and that's when we've got the tall crops, one row in a bed, and we can sow a nice diverse mix. The cover crops outside, tall, long season crops have really lent themselves to, and I've really enjoyed trying to get a diverse mix in them. Kale's been great. Beans, canes, a bit too much shade, I think. Although this year it's germinated well, I think we do well there. And the squash and the sweet corn, with a sort of three sisters planting, I did 3 years ago with just trefoil underneath, and that did well. Last year, this is a picture of last year, and in that mix, along with the trefoil, I put some cornflower annuals, buckwheat, flax, phacelia, and the crop is good, better than average, I would say, for us. The corn are planted at 1 metre distance, the same on the other side of the bed, and staggered to the squash. And although that's quite a wide spacing for sweet corn, it's an extra crop. We would normally, before we started doing this, we wouldn't have had any sweet corn in that area. And everything seems to grow really nicely together. The wildlife absolutely love it, and we've got a lot more insect and birds. So the diversity below ground and above ground is really beneficial. I haven't seen any issues really in the squash and corn. The kale bed is, what I'm finding really interesting is, after, when I managed to get a diverse mix going, this bed of kale on the right hand side, it was a really poor hard bed. It was compacted. The kale didn't do very well. We had quite a lot of slugs in there, which ate a lot of the kale. So it ended up being a mixed plant in the kale. They weren't very good. I sowed the same mix everywhere, but it didn't come up so well in the bigger kales. But this bed that was poor, the cover crop grew, and then the kales started to grow. And through the winter, it steadily, cropped as well as the others in the end. And we had a lot of whitefly around last year when the big commercial farms are harvesting the maize. There was just clouds of whitefly. We've never seen anything like it. I think the whole of Worcestershire was covered in whitefly. But we had whitefly on the kale. There was no way there's whitefly on everything, on us. But they never managed to. One thing I really noticed is that they didn't manage to propagate themselves. There'd be one, a couple of adults, and they'd only manage about 2 or 3 young, and they just never managed to burst into growth and to be a problem in the crop. And we didn't lose anything to whitefly. And when we're surrounded by whitefly like that, that's a real, that was a real big benefit, I think, to the improving soil health from, and I feel that is come from the crop covers. The tall crop mix, I'm tending to chuck anything in there I think will work. I'm looking for often maybe tall and slim foliaged plants. I love flax. I'm chucking flax everywhere. I've always got a pocket of flax in my seed in my pocket. I think it's tall, it's fine leaved, it's said to be strongly mycorrhizal. It's not overly competitive at all, and it's a great way to get a bit of diversity going. It's quite easy to collect the seed once you've got some going, so I'm often leaving some flour, trim it down. But buckwheat's great as well. It's so much easier to terminate than flax. And corn cockle, of the hardy annuals, the cornflower annuals, corn cockle has got a similar growth. It's indigenous, and seems to grow well with things. I'm liking a diverse mix and not concentrating too much on the legumes. I don't want too much nitrogen in the soil and the problems that can lead to. But I've found as long as the mix is really diverse, and it's not sown too thick. The difference in, and some of these sowings might be a bit thick actually looking at them, but the difference in when I'm broadcasting, this isn't very technical now. If I'm broadcasting it in a crop like this, I'll probably be putting about a quarter to an eighth of a honey pot jar. What's that, 500 ml jar of seed? And mixing that with some biostimulants. I find if I mix it with some rock dust, it's much easier to spread the seed and raking it into the bed. And maybe a bit of dry compost as well. But you end up with quite a lot more bulk that you can make a nice light sowing of seed. And but then when I do the winter mix, that's much thicker. But I am hoping to do more drilling, which will save a lot of seed and we'll get a better crops up. The shorter outdoor crops, the leeks I've talked about here. One thing I would say is you get a wonderful year like this where you get all these beautiful plants grown amongst your leeks, and you can never replicate it again. It just doesn't happen. So that was 3 years ago. Last year, our leeks went in very late, and we had a bit of a crop failure, and they went in. So resowed, they went in late. Didn't get a cover crop in them until the August sowing of the winter cover crop. I've been putting a mix of plants that'll winter kill and plants that'll go on through the winter till the following spring. And and although these leeks got, that's daikon radish in there and phacelia and oats, and although they got, you know, there's quite a lot going on in that bed, they were frosted out in December, I think, and they were frosted out in December, and the leeks had grown quite well. I didn't even know if we'd get to pick the leeks, but January they just carried on growing, January and February, and it was a reasonable crop of leeks in the end. Let's see. Oh yeah, and this is another leek bed, but it was the same. It was a very late planting of leeks with the same winter mix in with all the daikon radish and that. But this bed wasn't terminated until it's the last one that we've just terminated. Actually, I grazed it off a week ago, and so it went from when the frost killed everything off. I was a bit worried it was a bit patchy, but in the mix we've got some the cornflower hardy annuals. We've been collecting seed from the cut flower patch and adding as many hardy annuals to the mix as possible. They germinate in August and then they start, you know, slowly growing through the winter. Poppies, I love the poppies. I think that was my favourite plant in the winter mix last year, besides the, you know, the ones you buy from the seed company, because they got a really nice spread of leaves over the ground and they're growing slowly, and it's just a really nice rosette. They're easy to kill off then when you mow them off, but stopping that heavy rain and just ticking along through the winter, and then they're so beautiful for the areas that we're able to leave later in the later in the spring. I'll talk quickly about the wintergreen manure. This has become the last two winters now. Last year was much more successful than the year before, but we put, so by the end of August I've done some trials of different dates, and for us in the Midlands I need to get the hardy annuals in by the end of August. That sort of 3rd, 4th week in August is critical. And what we've done is last year was really lovely. We just got all the seed together, everybody on the farm, mixed the seed, added some biostimulants to the seed, and then we just all go out with all the hose and everything, and everybody takes a bait. We start one end of the farm and we just sowed seed, hoed all the beds, cleaned them up, and sow seed in absolutely any crop that we thought we could get away with. I'd certainly I think we might have more success in some of them if we drilled, but plants that we'd recently planted or that were going to come out fairly soon. And we managed to get, I would say we managed to get a cover crop on 80–90% of the beds on that end of August sowing. Some of it was patchy, and so what happens then is, as sort of once a month I'll go out, and as say maybe the brassica salads or something have come out, and I can then sow a bed. Anything in September to November, the mix is much less diverse, but we're getting a green market garden over winter. So from sort of late September, just the rye vetch and phacelia mix. But the end of August sowing was great. I put sunflowers in there. They'll only get to about 60 centimetres. Before we're near the river, so we cop for the frost quite well, even though, you know, it's quite a mildish area. I think they got killed off early November. But they'd still had a couple of months of growth, and they'd still been putting root exudates in the ground. All the daikon radish slightly hardier, and they were all killed sort of mid-December. But the soil, I mean, the difference in this picture of our market garden in December to what it would have been like 2 years ago when we would have been tarping crops out as they finished is just makes me smile. It's lovely, and the wildlife loves it. Jessie covered terminating cover crops much better than me. I've trying. I'd really love to get away from tarps. I haven't got a BCS and the tractor, and I don't think I could control the power harrow to just cultivate that shallow. But we are definitely looking to get one if we can afford it at the end of the year. That has been my conclusion as well, Jessie, is that, you know, a very light going over with some of these cover crops. The sheep, I'm not advising anybody get sheep unless you really love them, because they're hard work. We got hard soil and the sheep work on the cover crops. They can do some really good trampling, actually. We've had one of the later winter covers had a lot of, the vetch had grown really well, and it's really thick. And putting the sheep on twice and keeping them like in a, you know, tight. They did a very good job of trampling, and maybe not as good as I thought. I planted the courgettes into them, all excited, and yeah, it's going to be a bit of hoeing later in the season, but hey, it's good now. But so yeah, if you've got access to well-behaved sheep and you can do a bit of mod grazing on a cover crop, I think that's definitely showing some advantages, and it's certainly easier if the sheep have grazed it it's easier for us to hoe afterwards because you haven't got so much stringy growth. The other big advantage I like about the sheep is things like sow thistle and that, they love the flowers. So you can cut down on what weed seed is going down on the ground. But then there are plenty of weeds that they don't like and they won't eat. We had one area that had got really, really grassy. I didn't really bother with a cover crop on it because it could do nothing with the grass. Hoeing it was just too difficult. So I thought I'd try hire a turf cutter after nearly busting my shoulders trying to hoe it. Like Jessie, I don't like to ask people, the staff, to do something that I can't. So, you know, and it's good to do the really hard things because then it makes you come up with an alternative, I think. So we did a turf cutting trial. It worked, and it was much easier, really. It's just a mechanical hoe. I was a bit worried about the smearing effect, and it did smear because it's vibrating quite fast. But what we were able to do was to get just to go in about 2 to 4 centimeters with the turf cutter, and then I went over with the tractor and the flail mower and mowed really, really tight to the ground. So it was just clipping the ground. And what happened was, because the turf was all loose, the grass was just picked up. This was actually a green manure here, not the grassy bit, but everything was just picked up and hit against the side of the flail, and just dropped down on the ground like the picture you see on the left. And then we were able to plant into it the next day, and then the plant sat there and did nothing for about a month, looking quite pale. So I don't know whether that was, I think there's a couple of things going on there. Part of it, I should have watered more. I underestimated how dry we'd been over last winter. I think I did the turf cutting earlier than I could have or would have, because I didn't know whether it would work. So I wanted to give myself time to tarp out. When it did work, I thought, right, I need to get these plants in. I want to get some photosynthesis going on. And it was just too quick, I think. But the squash are growing great now. They've greened up beautifully. Yeah. And everywhere we did we planted beetroot, and that everywhere had a similar effect. It was a little bit slow, and then it got going. We had beds that we tarped out so we tarped for 2.5 weeks the cover crop, and we planted the same time. So we had 2 blocks next to each other, one with beetroot and spinach and similar crops in both. The tarped area got slugged much more. The turfed area was a little bit slower. I prefer not to have to do it again, but it's certainly an option if you've ended up with a very weedy mix. And yeah, well, I was thinking about garlic, but I think Jessie has answered that question. I've been wondering about what to do with the garlic. We used hay with our garlic, and I really, it's very weedy now. A job for the sheep, I think. And slugs have been our main issue with tarps. I love the tarps. Things grow really well after the tarps. I really want to get away from using plastic and all the impacts that has on the planet and on the farm. And we'll need to buy new tarps next year. So I've been working hard this year to try and terminate without tarps, hence the turf cutter. But I've got a couple of new hoe blades that we haven't really had a chance to use too much. But yeah, except for the slugs, the best thing we've done against the slugs, and it works for us because we're much drier than you lot in Wales and on the coast, has been to take the tarps off and hoe, and then leave for a few days and then hoe again. It's really not what I want to do, but we had some serious losses this year to slugs, and it made me feel like a rubbish grower at times, I must say. So sometimes you have to do what's not, we've had to do what's not ideal, but I don't think there's no other option for us at the minute until we get a balance. Okay, and that's me done, I think. Let me stop.
That's great. Thank you, Jayne. I mean, just absolutely amazing to see all that diversity and functional biodiversity, as we say, which is brilliant. I've got to go quickly into questions, and because you ended on slugs, and one of the top questions has been about slugs, I just want to bring Jessie in and say, ask what your experience of slugs has been with cover crops.
Yeah, we don't have slug issues very much here. We have very tiny slugs that just kind of get into things like lettuce. They do no damage. They're just annoying because we have to wash them out. So I haven't seen any, no matter what practice I've been trialing or what I've been doing, I haven't seen an uptick in slugs from any one thing that I've done. They're just not quite the pest here that they are in other places. So I am afraid I won't be able to talk too much to that.
No. Okay, that's good. Another question, which is, well, come to it. From a anonymous attendee, and it's a question about whether if you're using cover crops, can you manage the system without additions of compost?
We've kind of had to this last 2 years now, because we decided not to use the municipal compost, and we've used a little bit before tarps, just almost as a biostimulant, really. We've got a nice wood chip pile compost in, and I'm really looking forward to being able to put compost back on the ground. I get the impression you can buy good compost in America, you just can't get it here. We can't get it around us. So you can, but to be honest, our cover crops are being, if you tarp, they've just been eaten up by the biology in the land within like a few days and the soil is bare. So yeah, I don't know what your experience is, Jesse.
Yeah, so we're kind of in the same boat. We don't have great compost access. Like, we don't love our compost. We have a lot of access to it. It's just not very good. It's kind of the same thing. So our kind of approach has been, we're trying to figure out more ways to, one, create more of our own compost. And we've done several videos about this. If you go to the No-Till Growers YouTube channel, and recently I just posted a video about our sort of static aerated composting system. So we're trying to create more of our own compost on farm. We're also trying to use more things that we have access to, like hay, like wood chips, to create our own mulches and our own mulching composts. And then we're also using a lot of cover crops. So we're in that mode too, where we're trying to figure out how far can we push it? Like, how much can we do without compost? Honestly, my favorite way to set up a garden is if all you have access to is that kind of municipal compost, and it's not very good, and preferably we don't have a lot of plastic in ours, which I'm thankful for, but it does come with it sometimes. But if you have a decent municipal compost, it's kind of mulchy, it's not great, it doesn't have a lot of fertility to it. Putting that down in the fall and then putting a cover crop into that creates a really, really beautiful bed for us. That's been our experience. If I could do it all over again, if I had to start a whole garden from scratch, that would be my ideal approach, is a nice layer of compost with a good cover crop that I kill in June or late May, and then I'm able to plant from then on out. But it takes a little bit more creativity to do a good no-till system that keeps your soil healthy and covered without compost, that you can still seed into. That's really the big challenge.
Yeah, good. Another quite interesting question, and this is from Andy. It's with diverse cover crop mixes, is it good enough just to grow what works well, or is it important to be scientific about the different ways those plants are feeding the soil? Is diversity the most important point at entry level? I don't know who wants to answer that first. Maybe Jane.
I think the more diversity you've got, the less scientific you need to be. That's what I'm seeing. I think if you've just got one or two crops, they can act in competition more. But I do think about the plants that I'm putting in the mixes quite a lot and the way they grow. You don't always have the knowledge on the roots. You want, if you know how the roots grow, you want roots in different zones to your crop. But I think if you can get some good diversity and some small plants in there, I don't think you need to be too scientific.
Yeah, I would agree. It's easy to overthink these things. For us, what we've done is we've employed a lot of the diversity in the pathways. So there's a lot of flowers, like I mentioned, chamomile, there's a lot of different grasses, there's a lot of stuff going on in the pathways. In that way, I don't have to concern myself too much with what I'm doing in the beds, because that complicates a lot of what we do, especially with greens. But we still do those things. We just kind of go back and forth, and I try and focus more of that complexity where I don't have to manage it as hard. And for us, really adapting, trying to maybe start with one or two crops and kind of learning their growth habits, ones that you're not familiar with, like learn their growth habits, learn how tall they get, how fast they grow. And then you can start adding more and more as you go, would be a good way of approaching this, so that you're not overwhelming a crop necessarily that you really want, that you kind of understand how those plants grow, your understory, your sweet alyssum, or whatever it may be. And then that way, you're not overwhelming your crops. That may be one good way of getting into it without getting too scientific. Is just kind of pick a few, trial them, see how they grow, kind of figure out how they would compete with another crop speed wise. And yeah, I think that I think it's easy to overthink it, but some good amount of diversity is I really like the way that Jane put it about diversity. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, there is, if you want to get scientific, there's a lot of information out there on there's a Oscar Crops cover crops database, which I can try and find a link to, but which there's been loads of research being done on different species and what they can potentially contribute. And you know, I've always been wanting to get to know different green manures and how they react, and then sort of put them into mixes. But I mean, the approach you've got is great. It works. So as long as it works, that's the main thing. There's a question here about establishment and about irrigation. So there's two related questions about timings for sowing cover crops in relation to the main crops. And another about the water needs and irrigation. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, what was the first part of that question about establishment?
To find the question again. Sorry, I lost it.
I mean, establishment, you know, for just generally speaking, the reason that I say that I like direct sowing, and I can even talk to one of the questions or things that Jayne mentioned, you know, when you're looking at a diverse cover crop mix, all the seed sizes and shapes are different, like Jayne mentioned. And so finding a single way to seed all of those all at one time can be kind of tough. So what we've started doing is we'll broadcast, say, smaller stuff, your clovers, your crimson clovers, we'll broadcast those over the bed, and then we'll come through with the seeder with your grains and your bigger seeds kind of in whatever fits. Like often we're using the Jang. I know that the Earthway with the P plate can be a good option too. And then we'll run over those seeds. So we're kind of doing it at the same time. That helps too. And then maybe we'll even cover with a little bit of like a light compost or something, just to make sure that all that stuff or press it in with like a bed roller or something, just to get good seed to soil contact. But I often like broadcasting even an amendment, if I'm using some feather meal or something, on top of the soil, and then seeding right over it, especially if I'm doing something really dense, because that seeder is going to push that amendment enough into the soil that the plant will be able to use it. Or in this case, that seed. Did you find it, Phil?
I didn't, but I think the gist of it was in terms of timings of sowings in relating to main crops, and I guess it would depend on the crop. I know there's obviously sometimes you get a very short window before the crop canopy closes over. So in a sort of tillage situation, you would probably go through and till a couple of times before you would sow your cover crop. So I suppose it's how you manage that in a sort of no-till situation.
Well, we hoe a couple of times, so very similar really. We'll go through and hoe the crop a couple of times, and I like to get the seeds in as early as possible, as long as you're not putting plants that are too big in with the cover crop, with the cash crop. But yeah, 2 to 4 weeks after planting, I would say. And it depends on the time of year as well. In the spring, seeds germinating much slower, weed seeds germinating much slower. So it needs to be a bit longer. This time of year, I'm starting to sow the covers a bit quicker. But after the second hoeing for me. And
irrigation. I mean, if you look at the advice for a lot of the green manure crops, it's kind of sow in the spring and then sow again in the autumn, and the difficulties of sowing in sort of in high summer when things might not germinate so well. So, and that's probably about getting enough moisture and the soil contact with the soil that. And getting that right so that things can germinate. But do you find you have to irrigate a lot more with the cover crops?
I'm not irrigating more. I definitely irrigate if there's no rain after sowing. But we're irrigating the crops anyway. You have to keep, It's not like agricultural crops. You have to keep your crops watered anyway. I haven't found that an issue. I haven't had to water more, so just thoughtful watering around germination time.
Okay, good. There's one question here to both of you from Jonathan Smith, who thanks you both for your talks, very inspiring, and says to each of you, what would be your top tips for moving towards no or min-till green manure systems, and perhaps key lessons learned?
One of the big things I always tell people is if you've already got a system and it works relatively well, start small on, doing these other systems, because it's really easy to see, somebody online, somebody on YouTube or somebody on Instagram with a really clean garden, and they've laid a bunch of compost down and it works really well for them, because some people have better access to compost, or some people it works better in their climate. You don't know that that's going to go that way for you. So I've learned that lesson a lot the hard way, and I just go big and it ends up being costly. So start small, 1 or 2 beds or whatever, is small for your scale, and try a few different things and see what works. And then maybe even give it 2 years, before you really start scaling it up too much. That to me is there's nothing wrong with starting small, keeping the system the way it's been working for you, if it's been working. And then just try different things that you see or that you think may work in your context.
Yeah, I would second that. Having not done it in some places and paid the cost. But also, I think the doing the winter cover crop, so sowing into if you're starting small, sow into available beds in August, end of August, and then you can see how plants grow, and you can put a diverse mix on. Some of them will get killed, but if you haven't got an awful lot, if you're not doing a lot of beds, whatever happens, it's not going to be too hard to hoe out a couple of beds the following spring, and you can see how the plants grow and get to learn the plants. So do it over winter, I think.
Okay, thank you. There's one question about whether you've had any an increase of problems with disease, with the sort of density of foliage and stuff you have around the plants. I think that's probably to you, Jayne.
No, I think I just feel like everything is healthier. The plants are healthier, and disease is definitely much less of an issue. We've hardly had any mildew. In fact, I can't really think of any mildew. So yeah, less, the opposite.
Okay, good. Question here from Dan Richards. What are the organic no-till ways of direct sowing into cover crops? How do you clear immediate area around direct sowing time?
Direct sowing into cover crops is tough. It's more complicated, because what we do, if I, in crop planning, if I know that we're going to be sowing carrots, for instance, into that bed, I'm not going to sow rye that fall. I'm not going to sow something that's going to be very thick and very hard to get into. What I'm more likely to do is, like that last bit that I showed, we'd mow it, we would mow it again, we'd rake it off, and then you can sow. After you do that light surface tillage and you kill some of those weeds, that would be one way to do it. That's a lot of work for that setup, but that could get you there. Winter kill cover crops that die over winter. You can rake them off in the spring, and then you can sow into those beds. That's really, with cover crops, picking the wrong cover crop can be disastrous for the wrong spot and the wrong timing. So that's always something I encourage people to do, is really think about what you want from that cover crop and do some crop planning, so that there's a reason that we separate those slow rotation plots from those high rotation plots, is we know what crop is going into that plot the next year. Whereas in our high rotation stuff, it's a little bit more improvisational. So we can't always throw a cover crop in there, because we may need that bed for something that's, direct seeded, that's a little bit more gentle, needs a cleaner bed. So I don't know. Maybe Jayne has some more thoughts on that.
Yeah, Yeah, direct seeding. We've done less direct seeding this year. I'd have liked to have done more, but because of the cover crops and because of not having, the ground so good. But we've done similar to Jessie, really, tarping off a couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks, depending on the time. It takes a bit longer in the spring, but being prepared those 2-3 weeks before I'm going to sow, get the crop mowed off and the tarp down, and then raking off the cover. But we spread it back on the bed afterwards, because otherwise our paths are getting higher and our beds are lower. So after drilling, we spread it back on the beds. But I think sometimes it's been a bit thick, and we have had various failures with carrots, especially this year. Other things have been all right, but yeah, cleaner beds, I think, for the carrots. We have finally got carrots. But yeah, you have got to be careful with drilling for sure.
I use also, at this moment, there's not a good hand push seed drill on the market. There are actually more than I realized. I haven't trialed any of them. But you can find, actually, I did stories about it on our Instagram, which is not a great reference because I don't have there's no links or anything, but I did collect, somebody sent me a bunch of screenshots of all these different seeders that are around the world. Some that were built just for West Africa, where there's this little seeder and it will punch into basically anything. And you can push it. So I think the development of better seeders for this would be helpful, because then we could punch corn or beans or something into a spent cover crop more easily. Carrots, I think, are always going to be a challenge. But maybe we could get to the point of doing more lettuces and those bigger crops, maybe some okra or those sorts of things. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, well, let us know if you find something, Jesse.
I will. I want to trial them, but some of them are very expensive.
We're coming towards the end, but I've been reminded that there's some questions on biostimulants that we haven't covered. So if you can just briefly a little bit of an explanation about what you mean by that, Jayne, and what you use.
Whereas biostimulants are just basically products which will encourage the biology and soil microbes to come to the area and proliferate and feed off. And we use rock dust, and seaweed is a brilliant biostimulant. Molasses is a great biostimulant, and some well-composted, well-rested homemade compost as well. Or vermicast, absolutely brilliant biostimulant.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll second that. I mean, we use kelp and we'll use vermicast. And what we'll do with our cover crop sometimes is just take a slightly drier compost, like a sifted vermicompost, and literally rub all the cover crop with it so that it's getting good contact. And then we'll broadcast that if we're going to broadcast it. Or you can put that, as long as it's dry enough, you can put it in a seeder, but that can be a little tricky. It can clump up depending on what seeder you're using. But yeah, we like to, where we can, put some sort of even humic acid is another one. You can get it like pelletized sort of. That's another good biostimulant.
Okay, I'll just try and deal with a couple of quick questions of you briefly, and one is about scything. Whether either of you have any experience or tried that with them.
They don't make scythes small enough for me.
I have a scythe and I've been playing around with it. I enjoy it. I enjoy the act of scything. It's really difficult to do something like that on a commercial scale, because where speed and timing are so important. But it can be done well. I'm not that good at it, so that's part of it. And I did side down some cover crop kind of tall this year to allow it to regrow, to kind of encourage more root growth in the soil. So that was helpful. It was kind of a good tool because I don't have a mower that can do high mowing. So I used a scythe for that, and I plan to use it more, but in the middle of the season, you get these grand ideas in the winter, and then the middle of the season comes and you have no energy or time, and it becomes really difficult to find a way to use it.
And there's another question which is quite an interesting one on the impacts on crop rotation of some of these crops, like growing some of the brassicas in particularly, and the Asteraceae that you were growing before lettuce crops.
I've not been worrying too much about, as long as I've got a lot of diversity in the ground, like with the daikon radish or tillage radish in the winter, into the winter crop. It's as long as you've got more than 8 species, the effect of, we've got so many brassica weeds. I don't know why we like overly focus on the brassicas in a green manure.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. It's interesting. Okay, there are loads more questions, and I apologise for people who don't feel they haven't been able to get to your questions. It's it's been yeah, as I say, we could have probably gone on for longer. We may have to think about how we follow this up, because I think we're just scratching, to you as a sort of a bit of an analogy, I suppose, scratching the surface, almost literally, with this. But yeah, so I think there's much more we could go into and talk about. But I'd really like to thank both our speakers. I think it's been incredibly inspiring and really interesting, with the approaches that you both have, and I'd love to hear other people's experiences as well, and what people try and what they've got. This has been recorded, so we will share the recording. We will share the chat with the links, or some of the links that come into the chat, that I'll send out to everybody afterwards. Please check out you'll find a lot of the past webinars on the OGA YouTube channel, and on there you will find, I know Tully has mentioned the about wood chip and wood chip compost and the benefits of that, and in combination with these systems. And there's a good one of the last webinars was on the wonders of wood chip, and that's well worth checking out. And so please, I hope you've all been inspired, and follow up some of these links afterwards, and get Jesse's book and everything else. And I think I hope Susie has shared the link to the next webinar in the series, because I can't remember off the top of my head. My head's gone blank what it is. And there we go, right in the chat. So, which is on income for fair food, solidarity payments for CSA farms. So please check that out and sign up for that one if you can. And yeah, and once again, thank you both, Jesse and Jayne, for your inspiring presentations, and thanks all for attending. I hope you've enjoyed it, and see you all next month.
Yeah, thank you for having